countdown is on. There's very little negotiating time left here in Bonn. Some delegates are wondering how this is all going to come together ahead of COP24. The Paris Agreement established adaptation as an aspirational global goal. Adaptation envisages anticipating the negative effects of climate change and then taking steps to prevent or minimize damage.
Adaptation in Cancun was very much defined as a national issue. There is a national adaptation planning process which is underway. Countries can apply for support and technology and capacity building, all at the national level. But what it overlooks is that climate risks cross borders. Climate change in one part of the world can have an effect on people at a very different part of the world. There are different pathways of climate risk across borders that aren't being considered in the negotiations, and we're very concerned that that will lead to overlooking risks, that people are exposed to those risks, and that's not being considered in the negotiations or by countries planning for adaptation.
All countries will be required to submit adaptation communications. Collective adaptation efforts will be reviewed under the global stock-taking process.
Well, I think it's fair to say that mitigation has from the beginning been a priority, and prevention is of course always more important than cure. But we've now reached a point where adaptation can no longer be postponed or avoided. Impacts are already happening. We know that we're on a trajectory to at least 1.5 degrees. Impacts will happen. And if we're not starting to look seriously at adaptation, then people, particularly in developing countries, but also in other parts of the world, will be affected by the impacts that have become inevitable.
Adaptation is essential to increase resilience, protect the vulnerable, and to avoid destabilizing entire communities.
In cases of sea level rise, we are facing problems with our water contaminated. We are highly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. We need to adapt. Our people need to adapt so they can continue to live in their beautiful islands.
In just a few decades, we're going to be looking at more than 100 million people that are displaced by climate change. That's more than conflict, it's more than anything. And despite our very best efforts, we know what these impacts are. We know that it's only getting worse. We're not getting enough mitigation. Governments are not doing enough to bring emissions down. We are not hitting our 1.5 or our 2 degree target. And that has consequences. It has human consequences and human faces.
In other news, the Talanoa report back session gave participants an opportunity to reflect on 700 stories that were shared on Sunday. The big question is, what happens next? Where do we go from here? How will the Talanoa Dialogue feed into COP24? On Wednesday, the Talanoa closes, and delegates will be trying to complete their work for this session. Stay tuned as we continue to bring you daily video highlights from Bonn.